to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, August 31st, 2015, last day of the month, heading into September, heading into autumn. We have lots of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Before we get into the news, just a quick shout-out to everybody who sent me a birthday greeting and birthday gifts over the weekend. Thank you very much. I tried to reply to all of them. If I missed anybody, well, it's the email system, but it was kind of nice. Claire treated me to a trip to the Pacific Aviation Museum. At my age, that's an exciting birthday, and we had a lot of fun. We posted some pictures of it at the website. Now, before I get into more of the news, I'm watching the Fox News feed here, and they're going on about this sheriff's deputy who got shot. And, of course, yes, it is a tragedy. But just look at the contrast between how they're treating this individual versus how they treat individuals who are shot by the police. And the bias and hypocrisy and double standards are on full display for everybody. They're trying to use this to demonize the Black Lives Matter movement, and the Black Lives Matter people apparently didn't help because of a demonstration they had over the weekend where they're chanting pigs in a blanket, fry the bacon, which is not a way to reach some kind of harmonious accord. But remember, the real issue is police brutality against all Americans. It's being spun as racism, as to divide blacks and whites against each other. The U.S. government played the same dirty trick back in the 1960s. To stop opposition to the war in Vietnam, they kicked up racial tension with all these dirty tricks, Black Panther coloring book, rest of it. And they're doing it again. Hopefully you won't fall for it this time. Now then, over in Ukraine, major protests outside Poroshenko's government buildings. This one, though, is featuring this group of absolute nationalist, racist fanatics, borderline Nazis, who just hate Russians, and they are agitating in front of Ukraine's parliament building to demand all-out war against the eastern Ukrainian region, in particular the Donbass. And this feels like more staged agitation to give Poroshenko political cover for violating the Minsk agreements, because if all these people outside that parliament building were really serious how much they hate Russians and how much they hate the Donbass, why aren't they signing up for the army to go over there and do the work themselves? This is another group of people who say, war is good as long as somebody else is fighting it for me. Apparently there's been some violence. A grenade exploded in the crowd. Multiple injuries over there. It's almost starting to feel like the Maidan hoax all over again. And as you know, it's finally been confirmed that the Maidan snipers shot their own people to frame the previous Ukrainian government for it. Now, Russia has started accepting Ukrainian refugees being forced out of their homes by this civil war, proxy conquest war. They've already accepted over 1 million Ukrainians into their borders. Everybody's on the move because of all the wars. And they're talking about the immigration crisis. You even heard it on the SRN news break. And what they won't do is say the reason for all this refugee crisis, immigrant crisis, is because of all the wars being fought in all these countries the U.S. is trying to bring under their control. Now, Kiev has declared that if Russia refuses to restructure the debt, they're just not going to pay it at all. And considering Kiev's position economically and militarily, it's a reckless thing for them to be saying. Yet Senyuk is out there saying, you know, we need you to restructure our debt. If you don't do it, well, we're just going to write it on off. What are you going to do about it? So they're out there talking tough and trying to provoke Russia into doing something that can be cited as the reason we must go to war with Russia. Now, there's a very enlightening story coming out of Sputnik News. As you know, Poroshenko has been under criticism from his own people for the civil war, under the Ukrainian Nazis for slowing down the war, and he's certainly under criticism from his Western controllers that he hasn't succeeded in provoking the war with Russia that he was put into power in Kiev to do. And so now we're seeing this story that the U.S. is already looking at 2 potential replacements for Poroshenko. They're starting to say he's weak, he's not a strong enough strongman to move forward doing what we want him to do. And so Poroshenko's term in office may be coming to an end. He may get really depressed. He may have an accident in a small airplane. But it looks like the U.S. is not getting what they want out of Kiev, and they're going to replace their installed puppet ruler. Now, Russia has sent an email to UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and this is basically coming from Sergei Lavrov, saying it's time to move the United Nations headquarters out of the United States to Switzerland. And part of that has to do with the numerous times that the United States has refused entry to representatives of member nations of the United Nations because they just didn't want them to make a speech there. Plus, the United States gets a certain cachet, if you will, from being the nation that hosts the United Nations, even though the United States really is very much at odds with what the United Nations is trying to achieve, or what they tell us they're trying to achieve. And a lot of people are saying the UN's presence in New York puts them at a disadvantage. There's an environmental pressure to toe the line for U.S. interests, and it's time to get it out of the U.S. and relocate it to Switzerland, which is about as neutral as you can get in the world. Meanwhile, over the weekend, there was a surprising announcement from both François Hollande and Angela Merkel. They're now signing on board Putin's ceasefire plan, what's called the Minsk II agreement. And it's a reminder that the nations of Europe were okay with going along with all this posturing and posing and Russian sanctions and everything until it starts getting real, and they realize they're looking at a repeat of yet another world war, a third world war on their ground. They don't want to have anything to do with that. Their attitude is, if you want a world war, go fight it someplace else. Unfortunately, the world is a small place, and world wars tend to get fought pretty much everywhere. Now, over in Spain, there's a growing movement among the people to take Spain out of NATO. And Spanish activists are calling for major protests ahead of the upcoming NATO drills to practice for war with Russia. And we're seeing that across many of the countries in Europe. They don't want to be part of NATO anymore. They don't see it as protecting them from aggression. They see it as the author of aggression, and they're going to catch the shrapnel, and they don't want that. Meanwhile, speaking of shrapnel, and I have yet to see a word of this anywhere in the American corporate media, the ground invasion of Yemen has begun. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have crossed the border, and they're just, it's all-out war on Yemen. And apparently there are reports of extraordinary brutality being inflicted on civilians. And it's not entirely one-sided. 3 U.S. military advisors have been killed and 2 others wounded in the battle over Najran in Yemen. And apparently the Saudis also lost some people. It's not as easy as they thought it was going to be. And remember, this entire proxy war on Yemen is collective punishment of the people of Yemen for kicking out their U.S. puppet ruler. And collective punishment is a war crime. And I'm not the only person noticing the silence in the American media. Over in journalneo.org, they're saying total war in Yemen is totally ignored by the Western media. And it's absolutely right. They're trying to have a world war and not have you catch on to that's what's really going on. But we've been in what future historians are going to call World War III for about 5 years now. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in Syria, the Syrians are starting to point out how all of these supposed airstrikes from the U.S. and Israel and Turkey that are supposed to be targeting those evil ISIS terrorists are hitting critical infrastructure. And apparently one of the targets has been the water distribution system. And it has created a human crisis where people are having to walk miles to find water, and then walk back carrying those heavy water containers. And it's one of the reasons why Syrians are leaving Syria, which has created part of the immigration crisis in Europe. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that later in the show. But first, let's grab a couple of phone calls. Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just heard before you came on in the news that Obama is having difficulty closing Guantanamo Bay because of a reluctant Congress. I say to myself, he's written how many executive orders since he's been in? Why not run an executive order to close this base and transport it and move it into the United States?
Well, it's more obvious than that. I mean, Obama is the commander-in-chief. Guantanamo is a military installation, and he can order it closed all on his own. The problem is, a lot of the people who are still in Guantanamo, and there are a lot of people who are being kept there, even though the military tribunal says they're innocent of any wrongdoing. The problem for the United States is their bodies bear the scars of far worse things that were done to them than waterboarding. And they can't ever let these people be seen by anybody else or be in a position where a reporter might get to them, and they're kind of stuck. Everybody agrees Guantanamo is a terrible stain on America's image, along with Abu Ghraib and all these various other torture centers that have come to light. But right now, the U.S., literally, they're going to have to keep these people until they die because far worse things have been done to them. There was one guy that was allowed out, Binyam Mohammed, and he went public, and he showed the scars on his body to reporters, and it was a huge stink. Again, the American corporate media didn't cover it, but it was all over the foreign press that the tortures the United States is using against captured people, many of whom are innocent of any wrongdoing, went way beyond waterboarding. And that's the reason this whole thing about Guantanamo. They can't even move these people to regular prisons in the U.S. because those other prisoners will see them. And those other prisoners will be talking to their friends and family and saying, boy, you should see what they did to this guy. And that's the reason, you know, Obama's trying to pretend that he wants to close Guantanamo. No, he absolutely does not.
You know, that makes perfect sense. That has a lot of logic to it. I agree with that. That's very good. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And we're going to switch over here to Andrew in New York. Aloha, Andrew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. I'm going to talk about the MI6 agent named Garrett Williams.
I was going to talk about him a little bit later in the show. Go ahead.
Supposedly, he was found dead, in his London PF, supposedly he had information about the Clintons, and one thing that was suspicious, the investigators who did that, well, he said he died accident by, locking himself up in the bag. I'm like, that's real. That's great.
I mean, that was just absolutely absurd. He committed suicide, after he'd locked himself in his gym bag, and they even went to the point, and we posted this on the front of WhatReallyHappened.com, they went to the point of having somebody demonstrate how, yes, it actually is possible that you can crawl inside a gym bag and lock yourself inside, ignoring the part that's really missing. Why would he have bothered? And, now it's come out. And first of all, there's no question this guy was murdered. It was 5 hours between the discovery of his body and the official call to the police. The place had really been wiped out. There was second DNA on the bag itself, so there was a second party in the room. He was thought to have hacked into President Clinton's communications, and he had something on President Clinton. And it's another one of these strange Clinton deaths, and it really is absurd. And again, if you look at that picture, they staged this picture to say, see, you can crawl into a gym bag and lock yourself in and commit suicide. Okay, why would he have done that? And sometimes some of the things they come up with to try and cover up these murders are downright silly, and this is a classic case.
One thing that people misunderstand is, people say, oh, Bill Clinton was behind the Vince Foster murder, but you have to remember, this conspiracy, offers people immunity for, their crimes because, the conspiracy relies on blackmailing people with their, what they done in the past, Bill Clinton with the drug trade, so they'll make sure they cover up for them.
Well, my theory for the motive behind the murder of Vince Foster is we found out during the Whitewater investigation that the Clintons had kept some of their personal wealth under their control in violation of the requirement for the Presidential Blind Trust. Now, Vincent Foster was supposed to prepare the declarations for the Blind Trust, and if he knew they were fraud, he knew that he would go to jail if the fraud was ever uncovered. And all indications are he was planning on just resigning his position from the White House. The so-called suicide note appears to have actually been an outline for his letter of resignation, and then a second person added additional sentences above and below to try and make it look like it was a suicide note. Then they botched the signature, and they had to tear it up in that weird, bizarre way so that the signature piece was missing. But I think that's what it was about, because the trust declarations were already 6 months late. And the trustee's office was calling the White House every day, look, you're in violation of the law. We've got to get this taken care of. And so had Foster just resigned, it would have brought more attention on the blind trust. But Foster was murdered. His body was dumped in Fort Marcy Park to make it look like a suicide. And 3 days after that, the trust declarations were delivered to the trustee's office. And this was part of the records that were looted out of Foster's office before the park police were allowed in. And remember, they found Hillary's fingerprints on some of those documents. So it's as far as I'm concerned, that's a pretty solid theory for why Foster was killed.
If you read the book by Rocking Stitches, The Front of America, you will realize like how many government agents are like in prison for like exposing like government secrets. Like not everybody's been in government, but when they see something wrong, they will speak. But they always get like threats or they will be put in jail.
Oh yeah, it's huge. This is a very brutal government, and they will turn on their own people, you know, at the first sign of refusal to go along with what they're going along with. And you need to also remember, Vince Foster was one of Bill Clinton's 4 top fundraisers, all of whom died under questionable circumstances within 6 months of his taking office, and all of them were tied in with the flow of cash coming out of the Iran-Contra pipeline in Mena, Arkansas.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Now, over in Israel and Palestine, things are getting very tense. Apparently, the Jewish settlers have taken over the Al-Baraka Hospital complex in the southern West Bank city of Hebron. When we come back from these commercials, I'll tell you exactly what's going on with that. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about what's going on over in Israel and Palestine, where Jewish settlers from the illegal settlements have basically taken over control of the Al-Baraka Hospital complex in Hebron. And this has triggered, obviously, protests by the Palestinians who are used to getting their health care there. And apparently, according to Haaretz, the settlers are claiming they bought the hospital complex from a U.S.-based Christian non-governmental organization going through a Swedish firm serving as a middleman. So they're basically out there, they've taken over the hospital, and they're saying, we got a paper, it's ours, go away, you're anti-Semites if you don't believe us. And with this first of all, nobody at the hospital knows anything about a sale. The first they heard was when the settlers came through the door and said, it's ours, get out. And by going through Sweden and the U.S. and all this other stuff, any legal action by the Palestinians to recover their hospital is going to take years. Now, there's been a major upset to some of Israel's plans regarding oil and gas. Now, you're probably aware that over the last several years, Israel has tried to redraw the map of their territorial waters in the eastern Mediterranean. Instead of the internationally recognized practice of taking your border and extending it straight out along your coastline into the ocean, Israel has fudged their border to claim much of the offshore ocean in front of Lebanon and certainly in front of all of Gaza, where there is huge amounts of natural gas. And they have been doing this because they wanted to basically steal the gas belonging to the Lebanese and the Palestinians and sell it to Israel. Well, the best laid plans, so forth and so on, Egypt has just found a gigantic natural gas field on their own territory, and they're not going to need to buy anything from Israel. And so Israel has displayed its greed to the rest of the world, and they're not even going to make any money off of this. Now, last week we were talking about how Ehud Barak had come out with a claim that Netanyahu was on the verge of attacking Iran on his own no less than 3 times over the last couple of years. and he was restrained by his military high command the first 2 times and by other political problems with his own council the 3rd time. But there's a possible interpretation to this, because Israel's leverage over the U.S. regarding Iran has always rested on its threat to just go ahead and start the war themselves. And as we get closer and closer to the deadline for the Iran deals coming up on the 17th of September, this story may have been put out there to say, see how close we are. We're going to attack Iran. We're going to go in there. The only person who can stop it is you by killing the Iran deal. And so it may be more propaganda and brinksmanship. But we know that Israel is the author of all of this. And if the Congress votes down U.S. participation in the P5+1, it's not going to stop the rest of the P5+1 from going on and doing business with Iran. They're already over there, signing deals, contracts, everybody's making money. And the American people are going to be forced to confront the reality that we have a puppet regime in Washington, D.C., ruling this nation, spending our money and the blood of our children on behalf of a foreign government. And I hope that will have an impact during the elections next year. We need to just clean all these disloyal people out of the U.S. Congress. Now, from Israel's point of view, they're disloyal if they don't support Israel. I view loyalty as being loyalty to the United States of America. We're not seeing a lot of that coming out of the Congress right now. Now, there's another article over in Raw Story talking about this fierce battle going on in Washington over this Iran deal and pointing out that the ringleaders of this plan to derail the Iran deal are these fossilized architects from the Iraq War that was started with lies about weapons of mass destruction. They just want war. We need a war. We need a war for money. We need a war for Israel. We don't care how we get it. And we need to simply look at all these people and recognize they are all here working for a foreign power. Now, the people of Libya didn't like didn't like foreign puppet rule. People of Yemen didn't like foreign puppet rule. People of Iran didn't like it. People of Chile didn't like it. Why should we accept it? Why should we quietly sit here with the spectacle of a Congress of the United States of America that is out there obviously supporting Israel's will? Now, up in Great Britain, Board of Deputies of British Jews President Jonathan Arkush is out there saying threats. The West will pay a heavy price for appeasing Iran. In other words, if the P5+1 deal goes through, and it already has for all the other countries, Israel's going to start staging terror attacks and saying, see, Iran is coming after you. You should have listened to us. But again, look for the part that should be there and isn't. If the Iran deal goes through, why would Iran have a motive to carry out any terror attacks? They don't. They want to go back to peace through commerce and business and trade and all those nice, healthy things that nations like to do. The one with the motive to commit acts of terror is clearly going to be Israel. And they have a long history of carrying out terror attacks and blaming other people. They bombed the King David Hotel dressed in Arab clothing. Remember the Lavon affair? They were bombing American and British assets in Egypt and planting evidence to frame Egyptian Muslims until one of the bombers was actually caught, and it turned out to be an Israeli agent. Remember when Israel was trying to sink the USS Liberty? They were sending messages saying, oh yes, it's Egypt. Egypt is shooting your ship up. You should go bomb Egypt. This is what they do. By way of deception, thou shalt conquer. Now, here's a little factoid, and I was unaware of this. When we look at the illegal settlers in the illegal settlements, surprise, surprise, 15% of them are Americans. American Jews decide we're going to go strike a blow for Israel, and they'll move to the illegal settlements and settle down there, and there are now 60,000 of them. Shameless. Now, over in Japan, the government's recent change to the law to allow Japan to once again become a militarily active country has resulted in mass protests all over Japan and especially in Tokyo. Japan tried to pass all these new security bills, which are basically saying we're going to go back to wearing uniforms and building weapons of war and sticking our nose in wherever we feel like. And because of how that worked out the last time, the people of Japan are not very happy about that at all. Now, over at West Point, there's a professor, William Bradford, and he wrote this very long paper that was little more than an Iran and Muslim bashing exercise that basically came out and said that anybody doubting U.S. war policy, anybody questioning U.S. war policy, anybody challenging the story about Muslims in Iran coming from the government are basically guilty of treason. He says the reason we're not winning the wars is people are refusing to believe the government. Yeah, that's exactly right. But whose fault is that? If the U.S. government is dealing with a credibility crisis, it's of their own making. By the way, over at the Independent in Great Britain, they've ranked the 9 most warmongering countries in the world. The United States came in second. We were beat out by Uganda on the basis of its internal strife. But yes, the U.S. is a war-mongering country. We're the aggressors. We're the bad guys. I know you don't want to hear that, but that's what's going on. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're getting word that Russian warplanes have now entered the fray over Syria. And, of course, the big difference here is that the Russian warplanes really are aiming at ISIS. And Putin has pulled a brilliant move here, because the U.S. very well can't tell Russia, stay out of this, we'll take care of ISIS, even though we know ISIS was created by the United States specifically to topple Bashar al-Assad in Syria. Okay, now then, on the corporate media today, they were running this story about how polls are showing 71% of Americans are unhappy with the direction the United States is going. And that's a high number. I was rather surprised that the corporate media would even admit that. But we ran our own poll, which came out as 96% respondents are not happy with the direction the U.S. is going. Only 4% are. So I think the people are pretty much awake here. They're making a big deal over the fact that ISIS has now set up its own mint. It is minting its own version of the gold dinar, and how this is going to break capitalist enslavement. They're actually right about that. This is a currency with intrinsic value, not borrowed at interest from a private central bank. We need some of that here. Now, apparently, the Swiss envoy to Iran is up there doing business deals and actually showed the Iranians an anti-Netanyahu cartoon, which basically shows 2 doves dropping white stuff on Netanyahu's head. And it's meant to indicate how Netanyahu is losing his fight against world peace. I'm sure Netanyahu's out there screaming, "You're anti-Semites, you're Jew haters, you want Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens." Now, Russia just ended their Max Air show. They did $5.3 billion worth of business out of that air show. And everybody's out there buying and selling commercial aircraft, cargo aircraft, military aircraft. Some of the demonstrations of Russia's latest military jets, they're amazing. They're absolutely amazing. And they make the F-35 look like a clunker, which it is, unfortunately. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Whoops. Caller, I am sorry. I hit the wrong button. Please call back in. I'll take your phone call. Hardware problems. Loosen that on the keyboard. Now, getting on to the economic news, there's an article out of Investment Watch blog about how the Kool-Aid being dispensed by the central banks is starting to be exposed for what it is. We have had 80 months of zero interest rate policy. to the bankers and Wall Street all the free money to use they want, and it's kept them feeling very comfortable and wealthy and taken care of, but it hasn't done anything for the Main Street economy. And as you probably noticed from today's stock market, they're not quite as able to keep the numbers up as they used to be. The Dow ended 114 down. Now, not too long ago, Walmart, bowing to public pressure, raised their minimum wage. We are now finding out they are saving costs by simply cutting hours. So their workers are taking home the same amount of money, but in theory they're working few hours for it, except that we are hearing that a lot of companies in the U.S. are demanding workers work additional hours for free or risk losing their jobs. I mean, that is how bad things are out there. If you won a large prize in the Illinois lottery, you may be in trouble. Illinois has run out of the money to make the payments to previous big winners. They're sending them IOU notes. We owe you this. Trust us, we'll get it someday. And by the way, a lot of these lotteries have collapsed. They don't get a lot of press when they fall apart, because lotteries are just another way to get money out of the population. They got the one for California. It was sold to the people as benefiting the educational system. And they started selling the tickets, and immediately the state of California cut funds to the educational system in the same amount. So it didn't actually improve education. It was just another way of grabbing money from the people. And the amount paid in versus the amount paid out is abysmal. You get much better odds in Las Vegas than you do with the state lotteries. But there'll be a huge surge of ticket buying when they start these things, and then it'll sort of fizzle out as people begin to realize the odds of winning are just remote. California even changed their advertising to get away from you could win all this money to just how much fun it is to hold a ticket and daydream about what you'll do when you win. That's how they were selling these things. And when the sales fall off and there isn't enough new money coming in to make the payments on the old prizes, these things will collapse. Big state lottery in Texas collapsed like that a few years ago. Now it looks like Illinois' lottery is on the verge of it. They're trying to get by issuing IOUs to the prize winners. Okay, we're going to take a phone call, and this time, Chris, I promise I hit the right button. What's on your mind?
No problem, Mike. How you doing today?
Doing okay.
Okay, well, I wanted to talk about Donald Trump. I know he says what's on his mind, and in his last speech, I've seen that he was going on a campaign against the Iran deal with Ted Cruz. And I'm just thinking, how is that, going to help business for America? And he proclaims to be the master of the art of the deal. But we're losing a lot of money in Iran, and Russia and other countries are just going to step in, and like you said, they're going to get that deal.
Well, again, my opinion of Donald Trump is because he's an outsider, he's dangerously naive about what's really going on in terms of the machinations regarding Iran. He's basically making statements based on what he's seen off TV, and he should never do that. He needs a political advisor who can tell him, look, this is what the government's really been doing. Otherwise, he's going to walk into a well-prepared trap to embarrass him.
Yes. Well, also, one more thing. A couple of speeches ago, I heard someone stand up in the crowd and say, what about Israel? And Trump comes back with, I love Israel. And I don't know if it's not his naivety that prevented him from saying, the government of Israel, not so much.
Okay, well, everybody's trying to push this idea, but, every American politician professes affection for Israel, so that's kind of a null factor as far as I'm concerned. I will tell you this, Israel's media is very much against Trump. They hauled Rabbi Dov Zakheim out of obscurity to write an article in Haaretz saying, you can't have Trump. Trump is not reliable. Trump is a fraud. And if Israel's opposed to Trump, that's another plus over his column as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, that gives me a little bit of a better faith in him. Okay, Mike, you have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And we're going to grab Dustin in New Jersey before our top of the hour news break. What's on your mind?
Hey, does Illinois have any gold reserves?
Nobody has any gold reserves. The gold is over there being turned into coins by ISIS. That's going to be another reason. Oh, we've got to invade and take those gold coins from ISIS and melt them down and give them to the Federal Reserve so they can give them back to Germany so Germany can give them back to, Isn't
that bizarre? They're making their own gold coin. Some ain't right.
What? No, absolutely. It is a dire threat to the American financial system. That's why they went after Gaddafi. He was making gold coins, the gold dinar. And everybody's saying, yeah, let's use these because we can use these for commerce without having to give a piece of the action to the private central bankers.
Yeah, hey, Mike, did you hear anything about the Russian sub docking in Spain?
No.
And the UK's all upset about it?
No, I didn't, but, warships from countries visit other countries' ports on an ongoing basis. You should have seen the harbor down here, Pearl Harbor, during the last RIMPAC. It was amazing. But, yeah, Britain's going to make a stink about it because they're trying to put out this idea that Russia should stay inside Russia and only the NATO nations and the U.S. should have free reign of the seas, and, of course, that's nonsense.
Yeah, Russia's the happening place, man. They're doing deals. China's doing deals.
It is. If I weren't this old, I'd be going over there to Goskino and saying, hey, do you need an American visual effects expert to help your film industry along? We got to take a break for news. Thank you very much for the phone call, Dustin, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Well, apparently over in China, there has been yet another massive explosion at a chemical plant. And I have to be very honest, there are too many of these happening all over, all of a sudden. They had one in Spain. They had that Russian pipeline that blew up. Now remember, when the U.S. goes to economic war with a region, sabotage is a tool of that economic war. You go in and you sabotage and destroy economic assets. There's a really well-made movie out called The Good Shepherd about CIA, Skull and Bones, and they center on the Cuban Bay of Pigs invasion. And in there they have an illustration of how the U.S. went into a country that was moving toward Russia. Coffee was their major export, and the CIA identified a pest insect that would eat the coffee plants and make them unusable, and just airdropped them all over. And it's happened quite a bit. A lot of crop poisoning, a lot of industrial sabotage. During the 1970s, where the U.S. was starting to use the banks as a tool of foreign policy, they would graciously offer to loan money to South American governments. Then the CIA would go in and sabotage the means for those governments to repay the loans in a timely manner to keep them trapped in debt, through which they could be controlled and coerced, forced to sell off assets to private American ownership, much as what they've been doing over there in Greece. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Dave in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how's it going? I was listening, I guess, on Friday to Peter Schiff.
Yes.
And it just kind of made me laugh because he was sort of going over what happened all week with the economy and the stock markets. And basically what he said is all the money that the government was printing and pumping into the stock market was basically just barely hanging on to keep it balanced with the money that the banknotes that China was dumping. And it was just sort of like, I was just like, man, that's amazing. Like they were just barely hanging on by their skin of their teeth.
Well, I wouldn't categorize it that way. See, the problem is that the U.S. dollar is in a bit of a bind. The U.S. is still out there trying to enforce the global use of the U.S. dollar. They're trying to drag the world back to Bretton Woods. In order to do that, the dollar has to be seen as stable and having some kind of guaranteed worth. But every time they turn on that printing press or type some more zeros into a computer, they're causing inflation and the value of the dollar drops, and that, of course, is encouraging other nations to abandon the dollar as unreliable. So the federal government and the Treasury and Wall Street are trying to walk a fine line of printing up and creating enough new money to buy back all the T-bills that are being dumped, buy the stocks that are being dumped, but not overprint so much that the hyperinflation becomes really obvious to everybody. Because once we enter that part of the curve of hyperinflation, everybody's going to desert the dollar. So they're in a real bind.
Yeah, and the other thing, he put something that kind of like just sort of like opened my eyes a little bit, or sort of thing, or made something into perspective. He said, I didn't quite realize until he said you got to think of like the entire world's economy is contracting and contracting like inflation. Inflation is decreasing around the world on a macro scale, but then on a micro scale, it's increasing. You know, like we go to the store all the time, and it's $2 more for this, $2 more for that, but overall everything is deflating. So that was kind of an interesting.
Well, you're confusing the idea of deflation with recession, because this surplus of cash being put on out there is going to result in higher prices, because when you have too much money chasing too few goods and services, inevitably prices will rise to absorb the surplus available funds. But what's going on is there's inflation going on to cover Wall Street, but economic activity, manufacturing and so forth, buying of durable goods, buying of appliances, in fact, buying anything that isn't an essential for life has fallen way off, and that's the part of the economy that's contracting. And when you have that kind of contraction, at the same time you have inflation, you are definitely headed for the cliff. And it's a problem that simply creating more money to dump all over Wall Street really cannot change. And again, all of this fiscal policy we've seen come out of the U.S. government and Wall Street since 2008, it's all about propping up Wall Street and the illusion of a working economy. But on Main Street America, we're just not seeing it. Got retail closures all over the place. We're heading into another really terrible Christmas retail season. They've already got the Christmas stuff up in the stores around here. You know, right alongside the Thanksgiving and Halloween, and you will buy this stuff now. They're just every penny they're trying to grab. And it's been good for Wall Street and their pet politicians, and terrible for the rest of us.
Well, I even heard that McDonald's isn't even reporting their earnings or whatever anymore. It's like it's so bad for McDonald's that it was like, wow.
Well,
a lot of that.
Well, that's a problem. See, if you're a publicly traded corporation, you have to report your earnings.
Maybe, I don't know.
There may be some other factors they're not reporting, but I'm pretty sure McDonald's is a publicly traded corporation. And
definitely.
Yeah, they have to report their earnings. They may lie, and a lot of companies. I mean, remember Enron? They were using the mark-to-market accounting method to proclaim all of these amazing profits that sent their stock price up into the stratosphere, and it was all just creative bookkeeping.
Briax too.
Yes. Solyndra.
Just one last thing. I was going to say, he was calling from, or he was talking in Colorado. I guess there was a big meeting with the IMF or something, and he said that the head of the U.S. Treasury is a woman or something, the IMF, or
Janet Yellen is the chair of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, and he's saying she wasn't even showing up for this big, huge meeting with all these, I don't know, whoever was there, but he was like, everyone was kind of like, she's not there? Like, really?
Yeah, that's significant for the Federal Reserve to not have a representative at these IMF meetings. But you need to remember the IMF is centered on the United States. It's not truly a global organization. It likes to call itself the International Monetary Fund, just like the World Bank does, but they're actually American banking systems.
Oh, the IMF is strictly for the Americans, is it?
No. It's located in America. It's there to loan money to the rest of the world, but it's located here in the U.S.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks. I just wanted to mention a few things like that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here. All right, so getting on to the elections, Donald Trump, and there's a very interesting article in the Washington Examiner. Donald Trump is set to blow up the GOP orthodoxy, and without necessarily going into the details, it's basically hitting the point that the reason Donald Trump is doing so well is he's out there talking about all the things we know are problems here in the United States of America. Immigration, wealth inequality, instability in the economy, and the attitude of both traditional political parties was to control the debate going into the election, to say the issues are gay marriage and abortion and all this other stuff and never talk about the real problems. And Trump is out there talking about the real problems, and people understand that's what's going on. And it's going to be a problem also for the Democrats. They can't hide behind the manufactured fringe issues anymore. Even Newt Gingrich is out there saying Trump can actually win. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, getting on back to Donald Trump, there's still a big brouhaha over his comments on immigration, soundly denounced by those who support illegal immigration. But the tide is turning. Oddly enough, the chief political correspondent at Slate.com, which is liberal, let's be honest about it, Jamel Bowie, said that Trump's ideas on immigration are not a bad play, and says may actually appeal to black voters, because the black legal population of this country finds themselves in competition for the few available jobs with the illegal immigrants. Now, Governor Chris Christie was originally all gung-ho for undocumented immigrants, undocumented workers, whatever the PC term for it is, but he's seeing which way the weather is, or the wind is blowing in the American electorate, and so now he's changed his mind. He wants to track legal immigrants like FedEx packages with barcodes. We're going to start tattooing a barcode to track you. Gee, didn't the Nazis do that in the slave labor camps? They didn't have barcodes, they just had numbers. They're so old-fashioned about these things, really. But I think Chris Christie has misstepped on that particular idea. Now, as you know, there is a global refugee immigrant crisis all over the place. And the reality is, it is the aftermath of all these wars of conquest and intervention in other people's countries. And people are wondering what to do. At first, there was this open borders, we'll take in, you're tired, you're ragged, and then all of a sudden you're up to your eyebrows in all of these people who can't even speak the language. And everybody's starting to say, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're talking about, there's an article in Sputnik News, West about to surrender to barbarian invasions of our age. We're not just talking a few people, we're talking throngs and throngs who are fleeing these war zones, coming up out of Syria because the U.S. has been bombing the water supply. Nigel Farage is out there saying that mass immigration has left Britain unrecognizable. That may be part of the agenda. Remember, I've been saying that this open border policy, the erasure of old flags and stuff, it's an attempt to dilute and erase our sense of a national identity ahead of selling us the joys and benefits of a single global government and a single global private central bank, which they're never going to convince me of, by the way, here. But everybody's beginning to understand. There's been a huge backlash. Czech President Milos Zeman is suggesting that they need a European army to halt this, what he's calling the African invasion. Up in Germany, there have been attacks on refugee camps, fire bombings. It's getting very, very intense up there. Now, down in Australia, the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, is saying if more European countries will join us in bombing Syria, that'll make the Syrian refugee problem go away because they'll all be dead. And the supporters of illegal immigration or the New World Order agenda are out there saying, really, you shouldn't be paying any attention. You know, these people, they just want a better life, and they're absolutely harmless. Well, unfortunately, over in Italy, this immigrant from the Ivory Coast, 18 years old, came in on one of the boats, and he tried to rob this elderly couple, slashed up the old man, threw the woman out the window onto the street below. So this, you know, Trump is right. We are getting these immigrants from these other countries who can't make it in their own country. They're wanted for crimes in their own country. These other governments are taking advantage of our stupidity, and they're opening up their prisons and throwing them on the border and saying, that way, let them take care of you. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control have issued a warning to be on the alert for bubonic plague, the Black Death. They're saying there is a heightened risk. We don't want people to panic. But the number of cases in 2015 is much higher than usual. And then they go on with this bizarre idea of they have no idea. It's unclear why the number of cases is higher. Now, bubonic plague had been eradicated from the United States decades ago. But we know these illegal immigrants who are walking across that border are carrying dangerous, communicable diseases. Scabies, HIV, H1N1. Yes, they've been caught with bubonic plague, AIDS. I repeat myself. We could get one with Ebola showing up. But it's not politically correct to talk about these people as a possible threat to the health of the United States of America. No, it's not PC at all here. Do you know if any foreign government intentionally sent this many infected people into our country, it would be considered a biological warfare attack? So let's get on down to Hillary Rodham Clinton. There's been another release of emails from the State Department, and already 150 of them have been found to contain classified information. Hillary's defense is still that they weren't classified when I got them. I don't think they should have been classified, but it's being confirmed again. These are emails that were classified at their moment of creation, and per President Obama's executive order, only the agency issuing the classification has authority to declassify anything. And there are already cases where it's been documented. Hillary Clinton took this classified information, classified on its moment of creation, and shared it with people not cleared to have it. That's a violation of the Espionage Act. But already Hillary's defenders are out there trying to say, there's nothing, it's a tempest in a teapot. Over at the Denver Post, they have an article proclaiming that legal experts see no criminal trouble for Clinton thus far. You know, experts in government secrecy laws see no possibility of criminal action against Hillary. Well, they are true, but not because she didn't break the law. The Clintons are untouchable. Nobody's going to try and prosecute them. They know where all the dead bodies are buried and how they got to be dead bodies. They can blackmail everybody. And the proof of that is down in Florida, where this Clinton-appointed judge who refused to recuse himself threw out Larry Klayman's RICO lawsuit against the Clinton Foundation, a lawsuit which would have resulted in the confiscation of all the Clintons' ill-gotten wealth. And it was just gone. But we're not talking legality here. We're talking an election year. More when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Hillary and her email server. They're trying to figure out some way that's going to go away. No such luck. Hillary is now trying to handle the situation as if it's a legal matter. Hey, I didn't do anything legally wrong, and everything else is just nitpicking. And her supporters are out there saying, absolutely, she was in compliance with the letter of the law. But this isn't really about the law. It's not even really about Hillary now being proven to have been running guns to Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. It's not even about how a wide-open private email server coupled with a foundation, charitable, suggests the possibility Hillary was running an espionage operation out of the State Department. Don't forget when Clinton was running for his second term in office. He was authorizing this transfer of all this high technology to China with potential military applications. Everybody was objecting, and at the same time, Chinese money was pouring into his re-election campaign. There's a past track record. What's going on here is very simple, and Hillary doesn't get it. Hillary wants the White House, and that is political. We're coming up on the election year. And politics is not the letter of the law. Politics is perception. And the perception of Hillary is that she has not changed in her behavior since she was fired from the Watergate Committee for Ethics Violations all those years ago. I agree, Hillary will never go to jail. I'd like to see her there. I understand it's not going to happen. You know, the truly elite can commit whatever crime they want, including the murder of the White House Deputy Counsel, and they'll never be prosecuted. But neither is Hillary going to go to the White House, absent massive, massive election fraud. It's the only way she's going to get in. She's not going to get the vote of the people. Meanwhile, over at Fox News, they ran an interview with Christopher Farrell over at Judicial Watch, saying that contrary to Hillary's supporters, there are clear violations of the law here. Not just by Hillary Clinton, but by the State Department itself in not investigating her server when it became known she was using a private email server for government business. And Hillary's out there having deleted all these 30,000 plus emails, and we're just supposed to take her word for it that there was nothing classified or incriminating in there. I don't think so. Now, Hillary is also in trouble for a comment she made last week in which she equated the GOP's policies toward women with terrorist groups. Claimed the Republicans are carrying out a war on women with all this nonsense about Planned Parenthood chopping up little babies and selling them for parts. And that prompted Kathleen Willey to basically come forward and make the observation that Hillary Clinton wrote the book on terrorizing women. And the context is simply that Kathleen Willey is one of the many women who was sexually assaulted by Bill Clinton. In fact, he groped her in the Oval Office on the very same day her husband, Ed Willey, was suicided. So, complete lack of taste there. But Willey basically said Hillary Clinton was in charge of dealing with the bimbo eruptions. And we talk about that in my article, The Epic of Clinton's Mess, where Hillary went after any woman who came forward to say that she was a victim of Bill Clinton's sexual predations, to destroy them, smear them, undermine them, threaten them. And Kathleen Willey is out there saying, you know, she lived through all this stuff. If you want to talk about somebody who's made war on women, it's Hillary Clinton. Now, as you probably heard already in the latest Iowa poll, Sanders is surging. He's within the range of error of Hillary Clinton right now. Part of the scandal being that it's come out. Yahoo Tech has documented that 1/3 of her Twitter followers are all fakes. There are companies you can go to, and you will give them some money, and they will manufacture all kinds of completely phony Twitter followers and Facebook friends to make it look like you're very, very popular. And at least 1/3 of Hillary's Twitter followers are all fakes. They don't really exist. Probably hired the same person who made all those fake female profiles up at the Ashley Madison website. Now, down in New Mexico, their Attorney General has charged the Secretary of State, Diane Duran, with embezzlement, fraud, money laundering, and campaign finance violations. It looks like the fallout from massive election fraud has already started. And we're going to see it. And if you have not already seen the HBO documentary Hacking Democracy, you have to. We posted the trailer to WhatReallyHappened.com. And I'm pretty sure it's out there on Hulu and Netflix and what's the other big one out there? But you can find it. And if you can't, it is worth ordering the DVD to watch yourself and then share with your friends, because Americans need to understand our elections are rigged. Our election systems are intentionally designed to be rigged. Those electronic voting machines are wide open to fraud. And that HBO documentary focuses on a very wonderful lady named Bev Harris, who runs a website called blackboxvoting.org, who's been digging into all of the fraud built into these electronic voting machines. And Americans need to understand the degree to which election fraud is shaping our political culture or protecting the status quo. Now, my opinion on all of that is that if a government cannot prove beyond all doubt the accuracy, honesty, and fairness of the elections by which they claim authority over us, then we the people are neither legally nor morally obligated to obey that government's dictates, to pay its bills, and certainly not to sacrifice the lives of our children in these endless wars of conquest. The burden of proof is on the government to prove that they're being honest and truthful. Now, over in Great Britain, there is a huge hue and cry regarding the Chilcot Report. Now, the Chilcot Report is the report the British government has been preparing on just how it was that Great Britain got sucked into this war in Iraq on the basis of non-existent nuclear weapons. And the report has been dragging out and dragging out and dragging out, and now they're basically saying it can't come out until at least June of next year. And their excuse is, well, it's badly written, it's full of errors. You know, this part about how Tony Blair and George Bush just consciously decided to lie to everybody about nuclear weapons, that obviously has to be a typographic error. Which, no, it isn't. The Downing Street memo proves that. But the families are very angry, the British people are very angry, and we are hearing from sources like even The Guardian saying the delay in the report is coming from vested interests, people who've got to protect their guilt in this horrendous lying of the British people into a war of conquest. Just like we, the American people, were lied into a war of conquest. And we should be angry about it. We should be furious about it, especially the families of everybody who was killed or crippled in that war. But beyond that, how can you trust a government that lies about something that major? Saddam has nuclear weapons. And more to the point, how can you trust anything that government has ever said once you see a whopper of a lie like that? The answer is you can't. And you shouldn't. You should never take the government's word about anything because it's the government. You shouldn't take the word of the corporate media about anything because it is the corporate media. And those talking heads are paid millions of dollars every year to be very convincing liars. You don't need to pay millions of dollars for somebody to tell the truth. They're paid that money to be very convincing liars. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these few words. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, there is another whistleblower out there. His name is David Steele, 20-year veteran of the Marine Corps Intelligence Agency, former CIA clandestine services case officer. The guy's a spy. And apparently the second highest ranking civilian in the U.S. Marine Corps Intelligence. And he came out basically, and this is an article we saw over in collectivevolution.com, most terrorists are false flag terrorists or are created by our own security services. In the United States, every single terrorist incident we have had has been a false flag or has been an informant pushed on by the FBI. In fact, he goes on to say, citizens are now taking out restraining orders against FBI informants because it's high pressure. They're desperate to create this illusion there's a domestic terrorist threat, and they're getting so pushy and insistent, pounding on the door at 3 in the morning, come on, we got to go blow up something. And now the people are getting restraining orders. Tell this person not to come near me anymore. It's all fakes, fraud, and deception. Now, there's an article over in Medium.com where American and British intelligence experts are looking at this recently declassified Pentagon report and saying, yeah, this confirms the U.S. was supporting the extremist rebels in Syria, including Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They were running guns to them from Libya following the execution of Gaddafi for daring to have the gold dinar. And the hub for all that gun running was the consulate at Benghazi. That's one of the two big scandals hiding behind the limited hangout of Hillary's email server. So that first scandal, that's a confirm. Yeah, that's what was going on. At the same time, you and I were being told that Al-Qaeda and ISIS were our enemies, the U.S. government, the Obama administration, the State Department were sending them weapons and supplies. The second scandal behind the scandal isn't proven yet. But given the Clintons' past history, I think it's reasonable to suggest that a wide-open, unsecure private email server handling classified information of the United States government, coupled with a charitable foundation that can accept and launder money flowing in from other countries, is a recipe for the biggest espionage scandal in U.S. history. Another story coming out of INFOWARS. ISIS made in Langley, propped up by Tel Aviv and Riyadh. It's Emmanuel Goldstein. All over again. 1984. The government creates an enemy for everybody to be afraid of, to keep them controllable. Do the 2-minute hate. That's exactly what's going on here. Now, George Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning to people to beware of tyrannical government. Unfortunately, too many people in government are using it as an instruction manual. So, anyway, we already talked about Gareth Williams, who apparently, according to this story in The Independent, had hacked into President Bill Clinton's communications. And he was found dead, locked in a gym bag. And, oh, it was a suicide. Really, trust it was a suicide. Really, we've hired this contortionist to show how, yes, he could have crawled inside his own gym bag and locked it from the outside and then committed suicide once he was in the bag. Yeah, we're going to believe that one. Now, here's something that's very alarming. This is over in the Huffington Post. A federal appeals court has ruled that the marble plaza surrounding the Supreme Court building is now a non-public forum, meaning authorities can arrest and prosecute anybody who protests or pass out leaflets there. Now, that Supreme Court building was constructed and is maintained at taxpayer expense. That makes it a public building. We're seeing more and more how the judges in the court system have been completely co-opted. They've been bought, they've been blackmailed to try and redeclare the entire country in language which says the Constitution doesn't apply here anymore. You've got free speech zones way over there on the outskirts of town. Go do your protesting and leafleting there. But you're not allowed to be around the Supreme Court when it's making all of these horrible decisions. Like how spying on your email and looting the contents of your computers isn't a violation of the 4th and 5th and 10th Amendments. We're judges. Of course, we will tell you what to think about the law. No, you won't, Your Honors. I'm a big boy. I'll decide for myself what's constitutional and not constitutional. And I will stand by your own decision, Marbury versus Madison. Laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. Anybody trying to enforce those laws is acting outside the letter of the law. Over in Wisconsin, another story where some robbers tried to rob a clothing store, and the store owner, using an AR-15, was able to drive the criminals off. And it is a reminder that behind all the gun grabber rhetoric, you know, we will take, and especially in New York, their latest campaign is, we're going to take everybody's gun and that's going to reduce gun crime. No, it won't. It's going to leave the criminals who still have their guns in control of the streets. This Wisconsin store shows what's going on. An armed populace is less likely to be victimized by crime. Everyone's still making a big deal about the shooting of these two news people out there in Virginia. What if one of them had been carrying concealed? What if the shooter, because he was their friend and coworker, knew they carried concealed? He might have changed his mind and gone home. Looking at the video he shot himself, it almost looks like he changed his mind. He puts the gun up, hesitates, puts it down, Just stands there and then puts up the gun and pulls the trigger again. He was right on the edge of turning around. The awareness that one of those people was carrying a gun might have been the deciding factor, and everybody would still be alive. But no, it's a designated gun-free zone, and that makes everybody safe, because we all know that if anybody carries a gun past a sign saying it's a gun-free zone, they will spontaneously combust, just burst into flames. And then we can all toast marshmallows and hot dogs and sing Kumbaya and go home happy. Now then, this is a really huge scandal, or it ought to be. They are now confirming over at the VA, 240,000 veterans have died waiting for health care that they never got. A lot of vets are having to go to private medical practices at huge expense, bankrupting expense, to get the care the VA is supposed to be giving them. 240,000 vets have died of neglect by the VA. The VA is killing more Americans than the enemy is. Now, whether or not you agree with the wars, and I do not, I think we all agree that as a nation we owe a moral debt to those kids who put on those uniforms, even though they were misused horribly by the political leadership. They made a commitment to the country, they took the oath, they kept their promises. Some of them got killed. A lot of them have suffered permanent medical harm. We do have a moral obligation to be caring for them. We sort of trusted that the VA was going to do it for us. They haven't. The VA is turning out to be as much of a failure as the Minerals Management Service, the Securities Exchange Commission, the FDA, the USDA, NOAA, NASA. It's just more political machinations to serve whatever the agenda happens to be today. We have government agencies that are doing the opposite of what we're told they're supposed to do. The Securities Exchange Commission is protecting financial fraud. The FDA is licensing dangerous foods for us to eat. USDA, same thing with them. The Minerals Management Service allowed the Deepwater Horizon disaster to happen. And now we have the VA that is supposed to be providing health care for our wounded, crippled veterans. They're just ignoring them. 240,000 veterans have died waiting for their health care. That's a sin, and I don't use that word lightly. We'll be back after the news break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Now then, this PC campaign is getting way out of control. And there are some very troubling articles we posted to WhatReallyHappened.com. One came from the GatewayPundit.com, where students at Washington State University are being told they must defer to non-white students or they will not be graded well in their class. This is not coming from just one individual. Multiple professors at Washington State University have explicitly told students their grades will suffer unless they defer to non-whites. Their grades will be marked down if they use terms like illegal alien, male, female. Now, whatever happened to getting good grades because you were good at what you did? They're being told that they will have good grades if they behave, if they avoid certain words, if they only use the approved politically correct phraseology. Only then will they get good grades. And then they wonder why graduates from these universities can't find any high-paying jobs. They don't know any skills. They don't have an education. They have an indoctrination. It's just amazing. Another article on the same subject from SHTFplan.com. College students will be flunked for using oppressive and hateful language. And, of course, what constitutes oppressive and hateful language is sort of decided on the spot. This is newspeak right out of George Orwell. And it gets even worse. Up in South Dakota, their state educational board have now dropped early American history as a requirement for a high school degree. If you're going through high school in South Dakota, you don't have to take any courses about the early history of the United States, because really, all that nonsense about freedom and independence and all, it just takes time away from your mandated Holocaust studies and learning about human-caused global warming. They're trying to erase our cultural identity. It's just absurd. Now, over at the University of Texas, they're removing 2 statues. One is of Jefferson Davis because of complaints from the anti-Confederate, whatever, PC people. And to balance it out, they're removing a statue of former President Woodrow Wilson, who I'm not all that concerned about, because, after all, he did sell us into the clutches of the Federal Reserve. But they're removing it because at one point in his life, Woodrow Wilson supported the KKK. Now, we've all been brought up to look at the KKK as a bunch of really stupid rednecks drinking moonshine whiskey and hating the blacks. But you need to remember, the KKK originally looked really good, because it wasn't just about being anti-black. It was about preserving the American cultural identity against those who were trying to change it. And remember when they made that big deal about the Confederate flag as the flag of the KKK, and I found all these pictures online of the KKK marching through the streets of America with the stars and stripes. Everything you've been taught about history has to be re-examined. The villains may not have been quite as villainous as you've been told. The heroes may not have been as heroic as you've been told. It's all a manufactured fraud. And now they're just trying to erase our history, so we don't remember who we are. So we're just sort of this common clay out of which will be formed the new world order. Now, there is a lawsuit that has come up, and it's a Supreme Court case, Reed versus Town of Gilbert. And the case began because the town imposed tighter restrictions on church signs than on political ones. And the decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court, and I applaud this one, this idea was ridiculous. And they ruled government cannot arbitrarily discriminate against certain speech or speakers based on the content. And for progressives who are out there trying to ban the Confederacy, ban the Gadsden flag, ban the memory of Paul Revere and Thomas Jefferson, that's a serious blow. Because they don't really support the First Amendment unless it's their speech. For anybody else, oh, you're un-PC, therefore you've lost your protection of the Bill of Rights. Political correctness is becoming a Soviet-style single-party state. Now, over in Paris, France, they're coming up on the United Nations Climate Conference, where they're going to get together and say, they do believe us when we say the world is warming. Really, they still believe us. Really, if you'll believe, I'll believe. So, Paris, ahead of the climate conference, is going to ban cars within the city limits for a single day, with the idea of demonstrating how beautiful life will be if everybody is on foot or using bicycles or public transportation. I can tell you what's going to happen right now. There's going to be a major economic hit and major confusion all over the city. But it's symbolic, don't you know? Now, let's talk about Black Lives Matter, because they had this Black Lives Matter protest up in Minnesota where the marchers who were being protected by police officers were out there screaming, pigs in a blanket, smell the bacon, all of this hostility. And they had about 325 marchers up there in Minnesota, and it got all this coverage. Fox News is showing it. Now, a little bit further to the south, there was another march called All Lives Matter that drew 20,000 people and has been ignored by the corporate media because they're trying to sell you the idea of a racial divide in this country. to divide us against each other, just like COINTELPRO did back in the 1960s. Oh, the people are getting together in opposition to the war in Vietnam, in opposition to Wall Street greed. Well, we'll just split them up and get them to fight each other. We'll get the blacks to hate the whites. We'll get the feminists to hate the men. We'll get the old to hate the young and the rich to hate the poor. That's how government rules you. Now, we do have a serious problem in this country of out-of-control police brutality against all Americans of all colors. There's no question. Part of it is all these police departments are being trained by these Israeli security companies, which train American police to treat Americans the way the IDF treats the Palestinians. The other problem, of course, are these prescription antidepressants. And there was a study done in Florida that showed police officers are more heavy users of these medications than the average. And the average in this country right now is 1 out of every 4 people. Now, over on Fox News, they had Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark. He's out there describing the Black Lives Matter protest as slime and filth and cop haters. That's certainly the image they're trying to sell. I have to wonder if the FBI hasn't infiltrated the new Black Panther Party the way they infiltrated the old one, to cause a ruckus, because that's what they do. All right, we're coming up on our first commercial break. When we come back, we're going to have update on all the hurricanes that are going on or not going on, as the case may be. And then we're going to be talking about ClimateGate and some other stories about science. And the phone lines are open. Oh, we got a caller. I'm going to take your phone call as soon as we're back from these words from our sponsors. Okay, so Jeff, just stay on the line there. And we'll be back after... I'm pausing. I'm waiting for the clock to get to the bottom. After these few words from our sponsors. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Quick update on our hurricane situation. We have 3 Category 4 hurricanes in the ocean around us here in Hawaii. That's like a first time in history to have 3 such major storms. Now, obviously, Kilo is well and away and not going to be a problem. Last time I looked at the tracks, Ignacio continues to have the track moving north. I don't think we're going to get more than a little rain out of it, which is going to be tomorrow, late afternoon into Wednesday. The larger storm behind it, Yamina, that track also seems to be shifting north, and I don't think it's going to be a problem for us. There is another hurricane already forming off the coast of Mexico. They're already saying 90% chance of a major hurricane. We've got a really bad typhoon hurricane season here in the Pacific, and as has been the historical trend, the hurricane season in the Atlantic is very, very mild. Erica has spun out. It's no longer a hurricane. They're saying there's going to be a lot of rain on Florida, could be some flooding, but it's not going to be the major disaster they were expecting. The weather sensationalists are already focusing on a new storm, Fred, off the coast of Africa. We're going to be tracking that one across all day long. Okay, let's take some phone calls here. We're going to go to Jeff in Colorado. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, partner.
Aloha, partner.
I've never heard you say much about this. I know you probably get raped because of your locale out there, but crude oil prices are at a multi-year low right now.
Yes.
And yet the price at the pump it doesn't correspond with that.
No, the oil companies are taking advantage of the drop to maximize their profits and please their stockholders. And there are some places around the country where gas prices are reported down, and they're not as high here as they were during the first part of the year. But, absolutely, when the price of crude goes down, that's a chance for the oil companies to boost their profits.
Yeah, it generally takes 6 months and some kind of a government investigation to see any kind of a drop in pump prices around here anyway. All right. That's all I wanted to say. Well, I guess I was going to say about you saying that the NSA has proved their self-worthless. Congress ought to take their budget.
I absolutely agree. They're they're unconstitutional. They're illegal. They can't find the hackers. Can't find they can't find Lois Lerner's emails. Can't find Hillary Clinton's emails. What good are they? Huge amounts of money. And
I bet they can find yours, though.
I'm sure they probably could, but there's nothing very interesting in any of those. Anyway, Jeff, I'm going to let you go. We got a bunch of phone calls. We're going to switch over to Damien in New York. Aloha, Damien. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Just want to say really quick, belated happy birthday. I'm sorry I wasn't able to wish you happy birthday or send you an email out. I had it pretty busy. And I also want to let you know, you mentioned Michael Jackson. My hero, Charlie Parker, is the same birthday as yours.
Okay.
So pretty good company, and actually for that. But so it's always a nice celebration here in New York on one of the radio stations. They play them all for the 3 days. Those 3 days. Just wanted to say, so as far as those organizations, the NSA, the EPA, I mean, it really seems like every government organization, there's so much corruption. And I was never a person that thought, we should disband this government organization, that government organization. But I'm really starting to think that that's actually, it's better to put the power in the hands of the state and let them control their own
well, that was how the country was originally set up, where the states ran their own states and the federal government minded its own business. But since the end of the Civil War, the federal government has become this huge cancerous tumor across the landscape. And you're right. But you need to remember, the Environmental Protection Agency wasn't actually set up to protect the environment. It was an excuse to start grabbing public lands in violation of the Enclave Clause and sequester them away to use as collateral on government borrowing after Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility.
Right. I'm beginning to think that every organization is made up for false pretense. NSA, EPA, all these, the agriculture, the FDA. I mean, it seems like they all are. It's more about manipulating some kind of market one way or another, or gaining some further power, and not really doing any good for the public.
It's the nature of bureaucracy. It's the nature of bureaucracy, and again, that's why the founding fathers set up this country with power and authority with the people, with the communities, with the states, and the federal government was supposed to be kept weak and unable to cause trouble. We lost that a long time ago.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Take care. Again, belated happy birthday.
Thank you very, very much. And we're going to switch over to Gary in Oregon. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha.
Aloha.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Hey, I have a real problem with the term political correctness, because since politics involves two sides, there's never really a correction to it. So I came up with a definition of what political correctness is, and it equals the fascist suppression of language.
Yes, that's it exactly. That's exactly what it is. And the idea was...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, the idea was, as George Orwell predicted, to remove the ability to think certain politically incorrect thoughts from the human mind by destroying the language that supports those thoughts. And that's exactly what the PC movement's been about, to try and remove words that describe thoughts that the government doesn't want us thinking.
Exactly. And I think we should be reminding people exactly that political correctness is just nothing more than fascist suppression of language. Period.
It's newspeak. Okay?
What?
It's newspeak.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, as you know, the Old Farmer's Almanac has come out saying what we've already known all along. We're going into another brutal winter, and already the carbon Nazis are out there trying to revive this old canard about how global warming is causing colder weather. And remember, back in March 20th, 2000, UK independent snowfalls are now a thing of the past, and then we got record winters. Oh, well, that's because global warming causes colder weather. And they come out with all of these various explanations about why the warming Arctic is sending cold weather down here. Well, if it's warm enough to melt the Arctic ice, how does the air get below freezing by the time it gets down to Canada and the United States? All of these stories they come up with, of course, are a violation of the second law of thermodynamics, which they hope you don't know. because then you understand the scale of the lies that they're doing. So there was this article over in InsideClimateNews.org. Yes, a warmer Arctic means cold winters elsewhere. They're trying to already set the stage for why this coming ice-cold winter doesn't disprove the claim of human-caused global warming. This website actually got a Pulitzer Prize, which I guess we now understand is worth about as much as the Nobel Peace Prize. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about human-caused global warming. It is an epic, epic fraud. Now, a few years back, there was a huge scandal when somebody inside the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia leaked out a bunch of emails and software code from the people who were at the core of this, hey, humans are warming the planet, you got to pay carbon taxes and buy carbon credits and so forth. And it showed the deliberate manipulation of the historical record. They were going into Wikipedia and rewriting the history of the warming periods, the Roman and medieval warming periods. They were constantly trying to change older temperature records to be in line with this hockey stick. And there's an article that's out on Stephen Goddard WordPress pointing out just one of the examples, because there was a climatologist named Phil Jones whose data showed a half-degree centigrade drop in northern hemisphere temperature from 1940 to 1975. One of the emails that was leaked in the ClimateGate scandal was from Tom Wigley to Phil Jones, where it says right in there, this is a direct quote, it would be good to remove at least part of the 1940s blip, but we're still left with, why the blip? This was one of the emails that was pried out. So they were basically out there saying, we need to change the data here to push the agenda. Over in the Erciyes Mountains of Turkey, they're getting an early snow. Their ski industry is out there and celebrating, said, all right, we're going to be able to open this thing early. Flashback from the Canadian Broadcasting Company. This July is not only shaping up to be the coldest since 1993, it will very likely end an amazing run of 21 straight years where the average July high was 20 Celsius or warmer. Another story coming out of weather.gov, unusually cold weather for late May across the local area. And by the way, one of our members is putting up new stories about all over. They're already getting cold and snow. Already getting cold and snow. Record cold in Iceland. Their melt season ended a full month early. Canberra's coldest winter in 15 years. Finally ending. You watch. We're going to get hit with a horribly, horribly cold winter. And they're going to be out there saying, see, human-caused global warming causes cold weather. No, it doesn't. It's a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. They tried to rebrand as climate change, but there's a problem. The goal is to tax and control carbon, which, if you believe Al Gore's propaganda, is how you reduce global warming. But if the world is getting colder, then there's absolutely no justification for taxing and controlling carbon. But that's the goal, a carbon tax. That's what Obama needs, because he didn't make the money he thought he was going to make off of Obamacare. And so they're still out there trying to say global warming causes cold weather. It wasn't what they were saying back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when it really was getting warmer. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Andrea in Oklahoma, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, yesterday on the ABC News, the evening news, they talked about Obama traveling to Alaska, and the people that lived there were indicating, oh, it's been so hot all the summer. It's been in the 80s. Look at all our glaciers. And they were selling how hot it is and how global warming is. Of course, he's
well, you know why he's doing that in Alaska, right? Because he knows the vast majority of Americans aren't going to be able to go up and decide for themselves. When they were doing all these record-setting temperatures in Kansas and stuff, the Kansas people would say, no, that's not what we're seeing here. And that's why the claims about global warming proof are in more and more remote parts of the world where they don't think we can check up on them.
Yeah, it was in Prince William Sound, and in the same breath, he's going up there to because he signed that deal with doing more drilling and destroying the environment up there. So I just thought I'd run that by you.
Well, I wonder how many tons of carbon dioxide Air Force One dumped into the atmosphere for Obama to go up there to Alaska and annoy the polar bears. It really is just a huge amount of nonsense. Andrea, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the show. All righty, now, a couple of other stories we need to touch base on. It's going to be a brutal winter. It really is, and the scammers will not quit. The official philosophy of the United States government and the corporate media is, if at first you don't succeed, lie again, because that's all they know how to do. Now then, story out of Sierra Leone. They have determined there is a new Ebola death 6 days after they discharged their last known patient. So claims that Sierra Leone is now Ebola-free were just a little kind of premature, as it were. For those of you concerned about the mandatory vaccine agenda, it may alarm you to know there are now 271 new vaccines in the pipeline of development. Now that they have got the government to say, we will decide what vaccines you will be forced to take, they're going to come out with a lot more vaccines on which you're going to make a lot more money, because that's what they're doing. Story out of Channel4.com. The meningitis vaccine is causing a fever. The Public Health in England is warning patients, when you get this vaccine, you're going to suffer a high fever. But don't worry, it's not making you sick, it's so forth and so on. Now, here's an interesting story. It's often very hard to get statistics on cancer. We know that right now, 1 out of every 20 Americans can expect to get cancer at some point in their life. If you go to the National Cancer Institutes and you look for graphs of cancer infection rates, they have a graph that starts in 1975, and it goes up a little bit, then it starts down again, which they put out there to say, see, we're winning the fight against cancer, donate money, blah, 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 blah. But there's accurate data for cancer infections that go back way before 1975. And when you include that in there, you'll see that cancer rates have more than doubled in the last quarter of a century. And the National Cancer Institute, they're fudging their graphs just as badly as the global warming people fudge theirs. And there may be a reason for that. There's a story at Investment Watch blog we link to. The Centers for Disease Control at one point actually admitted 98 million Americans received a polio vaccine when it was contaminated with a cancer-causing virus. 98 million Americans was an 8-year span. And CDC has since removed that page from their website. There was a cache of it over at Google. Google removed that. But of course, in the age of the Internet, that doesn't mean anything. It's still saved all over the place. The skyrocketing cancer rates the National Cancer Institute is trying to hide may have been caused by the polio vaccine campaign. I have still not freed myself of the suspicion that the AIDS epidemic was an accidental byproduct of the smallpox vaccine campaigns in Africa, because Africa wasn't buying smallpox vaccine that was made in a modern, clean lab. They set up these little shacks with very sloppy, unsafe methods, and they were culturing cowpox from cows with bovine leukemia on the livers of sheep with the sheep Visna virus. And it's a perfect condition for an accidental recombination. And if you look at the HIV virus, it bears structural similarities to both bovine leukemia and sheep Visna virus. They're very reckless when they put these things out. And we got to take another break for commercials. When we come on back, more about vaccines and how people in their 40s are starting to get dementia from the exposure to mercury in vaccines. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as you know, over past decades, there's been concern over the use of mercury preservative compounds like thimerosal in vaccines as possibly causing neurological damage in the patients to which it's admitted. In particular, this out-of-control epidemic of autism in the United States of America. You're probably also aware that the CDC issued its own report, which they claimed proved there was no link between mercury preservatives in vaccines and autism, only to have one of the authors of the actual report blow the whistle that the report was a complete fraud, that they cherry-picked the data to support the idea that vaccines are safe and you should go on buying and using them because they're big business. Well, over in Bournemouth University in England, they did a study because they began to notice that the problem of dementia is striking people at younger and younger ages. Now, if you're of my generation, dementia is something that hits people of my age and above, 70s, 80s, 90s. And over in England, they have been seeing more and more people aged 40 starting to show degenerative brain damage. And they did up a study, and it was published in Surgical Neurology International. And they said this has reached almost epidemic levels, and it has to be caused by environmental factors. And one of the environmental factors is the fact that these are people who, when they were much younger, were given vaccines with mercury-based preservatives. And maybe it didn't turn them into being autistic immediately, but that doesn't mean that longer-term, more subtle damage can be ruled out. Now, over in Rhode Island, there is a mass movement opposing this mandate for the HPV vaccine, a vaccine that is very lucrative for the vaccine maker, for the health practitioners who administer it, which has caused huge amounts of permanent damage of young girls over in Europe to the point where they're thinking about blocking it. And if there is an inalienable right for all mankind, it's the right to decide what goes in our body. But the government of the United States of America is treating us like they own us. We're their property. We're their livestock, and they're treating us just the way factory farms treat their livestock. They're going to decide what we eat, what we don't eat. By the way, school is starting up again, and those Michelle Obama school lunches have not improved. They're going to decide what medications we must take, what medications we're not allowed to take. They really have come to see us as a lower life form. It's like the Eloy and Morlock schism described by H.G. Wells in The Time Machine. Meanwhile, pardon me, there's some new research, this is over in the sleuthjournal.com, linking statin drugs to not just to heart trouble, which has been reported all along, but also as a contributing cause to arthritis. Because arthritis is an autoimmune disorder where your body's immune system starts to attack your own joint tissues. And this research is showing that these cholesterol-lowering drugs may be contributing to an epidemic of autoimmunity in exposed population. This was published in the journal Arthritis Research and Therapy. And what's really sorry about this is they're coming to understand that cholesterol isn't the villain we were told it was. Because that's another business model. Oh, cholesterol is bad. We'll give you a medicine to make it go away. And then the medicine turns out to have very serious side effects, and then you find out it wasn't really doing anything positive for you anyway. This brings me to this story, and I mentioned it last week, but I want to touch on it again. This is reported in the Las Vegas Sun, and they're saying that over the last 10 years, more than 30 employees of the Clark County School District have been arrested for sexual misconduct involving the students, the little kiddies. 6 of them went to jail. 6 had the charges dismissed. The rest were probation or still waiting trial. And we're seeing all this bizarre behavior. And so the question I have is, were these guys on antidepressants? Now, we know antidepressants can trigger violent behavior, suicide, but it's not an either-or situation. What about people who are not driven to suicide or mass violence? Nobody's going to be reporting how they're behaving in the newspaper. What if in the quest for pharmaceutical profits, we have doped up the entire nation with medications that basically result in poor impulse control. They're not making good decisions. Should I grab that little hottie in the cheerleader's outfit? Yeah, sure, why not? There may be a whole range of aberrant behaviors we're seeing in our society that track back to these medications. I did a check and saw that as the antidepressants began to really saturate the American market, the per capita incidence of domestic violence increased at the exact same time. Because what is domestic violence? Two people are angry with each other, and one of them has poor impulse control. He gets an impulse to smack. That's what's going to happen. I think there needs to be a real examination that a lot of the more bizarre behavior we're seeing, not just in the American people, but certainly in the British media and political system, are all these people molesting the little kiddies? Are they on these antidepressants? Because it is a common characteristic that these medications, you just go with your impulse. Any restraining mental activity just is numbed out. You just sort of go with the impulse to do what your instincts are saying, and that can lead you into some very bad behaviors. Now, Monsanto has now dropped their effort to buy Syngenta for $46.5 billion. Apparently, the shareholders were not entirely happy with that idea. Another thing coming out of Monsanto, as you know, despite claims of cell phone towers and mites and pesticides, a lot of people are thinking that the colony collapse disorder, killing off the honeybees, which are essential to food production, was caused by genetically altered pollen. And a lot of this goes back to an article that appeared in Nature magazine, which documented GMO pollen was harmful to benign insect species. The specific one studied by Nature was the monarch butterfly. Now, Monsanto has apparently decided there's another market opportunity, and they're going to replace the honeybees that were killed off by all these pesticides and chemicals and GMO with genetically engineered flying ants. We'll sell you a box of these ants that'll pollinate your plants for you. All of a sudden, that old 1950s classic movie, Them, pops through my head. Scotland has followed, Germany has followed Scotland's lead to ban all GMO crops, opt out of EU approval, but here in the U.S., you're not allowed to know if you're eating GMO. You're not allowed to ban GMO crops in your neighborhood. And by the way, farmers are now drenching their crops with glyphosate because they've discovered it causes the plants to mature a little bit faster, and they can do a faster harvest. And unfortunately, glyphosate is harmful for you to consume. And they're starting to dose wheat, cotton, alfalfa, oats, sugarcane, beans, mustard, oilseed, rape, rye, triticale, lentils, peas, flax. All of these are being dosed in this dangerous chemical to be harvested and sent to market. We have, according to an article in Investment Watch blog, we have lost 93% of food varieties in the last 100 years. I was thinking it was primarily economic. I'll go down to my local supermarket, and there's just, there's a lot of very few different items on the shelves. It doesn't have the amazing variety I remember from supermarkets when I was a kid. It's racks and racks of exactly the same thing. You will buy this because it's all we've got to sell you. But apparently a lot of food source plants just aren't making it anymore in this age of all these chemicals. Okay. Let's see. One more story. Nope, there's the music, actually. It's time for me to get out of here. I got to do Jim Goddard's show. We'll be back here tomorrow, Tuesday, on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay informed. Thanks to everybody who called your local talk radio stations. We're getting inquiries. We're picking up affiliates next month. Thanks to you. Aloha, America.